My son told me I contribute nothing valuable. His wife nodded like a judge banging a gavel. So I proved them both wrong in the quietest, sharpest way I know. My name is Giovanna Romano, and for 45 years I ran Romano's Kitchen on Columbus Avenue, 16-hour days, 7 days a week, until my hands swelled like risen dough and my knees clicked like old bread racks. Everything I own came from the heat of that kitchen, the $2.8 million North Beach house, the hardwood floors I scrubbed on my knees, the marble counters I chose because they reminded me of Naples. My son, Tony, corporate lawyer, $350,000 a year, BMW, 2 tailored suits for every season. He lives rent-free in my house. And his wife, Bethany, Boston old money, wrists stacked with bracelets that cost more than a month's payroll in my old restaurant. Lives here, too. They entertain at my table, pose on my staircase for her 300,000 Instagram followers, and tag the location our San Francisco home. Our funny word. Last Tuesday, they invited Bethany's parents, William and Margaret Crawford, glossy people with glacier eyes, over for wine. I set out olives, shaved Parmigiano, and cracked black pepper into the good olive oil the way my mother showed me, a gesture of welcome. The Crawfords complimented the kitchen. "It's exquisite," Margaret said. "So?" "Elevated." I smiled because I paid for every inch of that elevation. Then William asked lightly, "And what does your mother-in-law contribute?" His smile was the kind you polish for country club doorways. Tony didn't even hesitate. "She eats our food," he said, and Bethany added with a laugh too bright to be accidental, "and she doesn't really help." My hands went still around the oil cruet. In my chest, something quietly folded. Like a napkin after a meal, I looked at my son, a man I raised on Sunday gravy, and meatballs rolled on a floured table between homework and bedtime, and I said, "Interesting perspective." I was not dramatic. I did not cry. I simply excused myself, rinsed the plates, and put away the cheese. Because grief is louder than rage, and I have learned to do my loudest work in silence. What Tony and Bethany didn't know was that I had already arranged 3 phone calls that could move mountains. One to my banker, one to my lawyer, and one to a real estate agent who knows this city like a map of veins. Tony wasn't always a stranger. When he was little, he'd sit on the counter while I stirred the pot, steam turning his hair into soft curls. "Mama, tell me about Nonna's village," he'd say, pinching gnocchi with the serious devotion of a saint. That child wore flour like snow and asked questions like prayers. Somewhere between Harvard and a glass office with a view of other glass offices, he buried that boy and chose a sharper name. Tony Roman. On paper, he's still Antonio Giuseppe Romano, but in conference rooms he shaved off our syllables like an old crust, cleaner, faster, forgettable. The changes came like thefts. One day, the living room wall that held our family, my parents' wedding in Naples, Tony's baptism photo, cousins packed elbow to elbow, was replaced by abstract prints that matched a West Elm ad. "We're updating," Bethany said. "It needs to look contemporary for my colleagues." The copper pasta machine I brought from Italy in 1973, hidden in the basement. My mother's hallway crucifix gone. In their place, Tony's diplomas, his bar certificate, photos of him shaking hands with judges and men who smile with their teeth only. Then the introductions. Last November, at a dinner party twinkling with people who pronounce Napa like it's a secret, I heard Tony tell his managing partner, "That's Giovanna. She helps with the property, not my mother. Not the woman who fed half of North Beach and put him through Stanford Law by selling osso buco to tourists and regulars who called me Aunt Gio. Property help." The words clanged against the stainless steel of my memory. I told myself I was being sensitive. Then came the night I simmered Sunday gravy for 6 hours, San Marzano tomatoes, basil from the garden, sausage from Molinari's. I made enough for 8. Tony met me at the door. We're ordering atelier crème. It's important for Beth's parents I packed the gravy into containers and labeled them like a woman who still believes in later. 3 days later, I found them in the trash, untouched. That evening, I sat alone at the kitchen table with a heel of bread. I dipped it in the sacred red and tasted my mother's voice telling me to swallow pride with salt. The first phone call I made after washing the pot was to Heritage Bank. "Patricia," I said, "what's the current market value on my home?" She didn't hesitate. $2.8 million. Numbers don't impress me. What impresses me is what numbers can move. If I chose to sell, I asked, how quickly could I close? Patricia said, all cash, no contingencies. 2 to 4 weeks, I thanked her, hung up, and dialed Chen and Associates. Immigration. My voice steadied. I want to sponsor 4 family members from Naples, I said. Marco, Sofia, Pepe, and Lucia Romano, ages 19 to 28. Clean records, hardworking. They deserve a beginning. Attorney David Chen listened the way I like without interrupting. Mrs. Romano, it's expensive and a commitment. Good, I said. Things that matter usually are. He gave me figures, filings, travel, settlement funds. I thought of the containers of gravy in the trash and said yes to every line. The third call was to Jennifer Martinez at Coldwell Banker. She sold a half-dozen places for my former regulars. She knows who writes checks without blinking. I need quiet showings, I told her. Cash buyers. 2-week close, if possible. And Jennifer, my son and his wife, aren't to know. Understood, she said, voice thrumming with the heat of a hunt. I'll have them lined up by Sunday. On Saturday morning, Tony shuffled in for coffee, oat milk in hand, wearing the face of a man who assumes the world resets each morning, just for him. About last night, he started. I folded my newspaper. The coffee is fresh. He waited, then retreated. I took my keys and left. I opened a new account that afternoon at a different Wells Fargo branch and transferred $500,000. Money is a tool. I have done more with less my entire life. Sunday at 1:45 p.m., Jennifer arrived with 3 sets of buyers, a tech couple still glowing from a Google acquisition, an investment banker who smelled like expensive soap, and a family from New York who talked about dinner parties as if joy must be catered. I watched from the upstairs hall, silent as steam. They touched the marble I had chosen, praised the light that falls at 4 o'clock like a blessing, admired the clean lines that erased my mother's crucifix. By 5 p.m., I had 3 cash offers. The numbers pressed against my palm like warm coins. The highest wasn't the fastest, and I am a woman of timing. I chose the hedge fund family at $2.85 million, with a 2-week close. Jennifer hesitated. Are you sure, Gio? It's not the top, I'm sure, I said. Some prices are paid in time. The papers moved across desks like chess pieces I didn't need to see to know their destination. I cooked for one that night, spaghetti aglio e olio, the garlic singing in the pan like it remembered every story it ever heard. Tony texted from a wine bar. Bethany posted a boomerang of her glass clinking against another glass with the caption, "To building a life together." I tapped the phone, dark. Monday to Friday unfolded like dough under a practiced hand. David Chen filed the petitions. I wired the first installment of legal fees, $68,000, without flinching. I toured a modest studio in the Sunset District with a window that gulped fog. It was small, clean, anonymous, the kind of place a woman can gather herself without an audience. I signed the lease. I also opened the basement and pulled out the things Bethany hid when she refreshed the house. My mother's crucifix, the copper pasta machine, the framed Chronicle review that called my restaurant a North Beach treasure. I laid them on the dining table like relics rescued from a shipwreck. I packed them into 3 boxes, our true inheritance. Tony noticed none of it. He came and went wearing the earnest exhaustion of men paid to look busy. When he spoke to me, it was with courtesy polished thin. Thanks. Good night. We'll be late. Once, Bethany asked if I could be a love and sign for a flower delivery. I signed, then cut the stems at an angle and coaxed the blooms to open, because I refuse to do things badly, even for people who think I'm dull furniture. On June 15th, the text from David landed at 6:12 a.m. Approved. I drove to SFO with 4 hand-painted signs tucked under my arm. Marco, Sophia, Pepe, Lucia. The arrivals gate breathed out tired people clutching plastic-wrapped hopes. Then I saw him, Marco, with my father's jaw and Nonna's shoulders, lugging a wooden case I knew held pasta tools older than me. He crushed me into a hug that clicked my spine into place. Zia Gio, he said, voice wet. America smells like coffee and possibility. Sophia came next, rosary twined in her fingers, eyes that fill and hold like ladles. Pepe, polite and bright, handed me a framed photograph I'd never seen. My father, 20, outside the original Romano trattoria in Naples. Finally, Lucia, ink on her fingers, museum stickers on her portfolio case, smiled, like art is a language she already speaks fluently. Thank you, she said softly. I will repay with work. We drove home, my new temporary home in the Richmond. It was humble and theirs. We ate carbonara and made a plan. School for Sophia, clients for Pepe, a gallery application for Lucia and for Marco, fire, flower, and a dining room that remembers applause. August arrived wearing gold, light, and sharp decisions. Tony and Bethany planned an engagement party for the 3rd. White tents, strings of lights, a floral budget that could have paid a month of wages back in the day. We want our friends to see the house at its best, Bethany said to her phone camera, sunning herself in my courtyard like a cat. The house was no longer ours. The Hendersons, a family of 5 who laugh with their stomachs, were scheduled to take possession the next morning. Jennifer confirmed the walk-through time. The moving company set their clocks, 7 p.m. pack, 11:30 p.m. load. Midnight done. I stayed out of the way while the rental chairs arrived. I ironed a blouse, pinned up my hair, and placed my mother's crucifix in my pocket, the cool metal, a steadying hand, on the inside of my palm. By 6, the Crawfords' Bentley nosed up the street. By 7, 43 guests sluiced into the backyard, their laughter a polished instrument. Tony floated among them, orchestral in his gestures. Our home, he told William and Margaret, sweeping an arm across my hibiscus like he planted it with his hands. At 7:42, I heard the sound I'd been waiting for all day, the diesel sigh and brake hiss of Rodriguez moving. The truck settled in front of the house like a verdict. Conversations thinned, then died as heads turned. Tony stepped to the door, champagne glass lifted like a shield. "Excuse me," he called, smile welded on. "I think there's a mistake." "We're not moving." Rodriguez checked his clipboard. 1247 Stockton? "Yes." He looked up. "We're here for the Romano job." Pack and move. Tonight Tony laughed the way men laugh when they're close to fear. "Who hired you?" I stepped onto the porch. "I did." The glass left his hand and fell in a small, expensive crash. Behind him, Bethany stared, white as the florist's roses. Guests gathered like moths. "Mama!" Tony hissed. "Not here." "Here," I said gently. "Exactly." "Settlement is tomorrow at noon," Rodriguez added matter-of-factly. "New owners walk through before that." "What settlement?" Tony's voice cracked high, a sound from childhood he thought he'd outgrown. "The one I signed April 2nd, I said. "Henderson family. Hedge fund money. Real children. 2 dogs." Bethany's mother clutched her pearls because of course she did. The yard came to a full and reverent silence. Even the lights seemed to soften, as if they didn't want to be rude. Tony searched for privacy and found a crowd. "We'll talk inside," he tried. I shook my head. "No more backrooms, Antonio." I was spoken about in whispers long enough. I opened the side gate. "Come," I called, and 4 young people stepped into the light of San Francisco like a benediction. Marco, broad-shouldered and solemn. Sophia, careful and bright. Pepe, respectful. Eyes quick. Lucia, carrying her portfolio as if it were another rib. "Everyone," I said. "Meet the Romanos of Naples, your family, Tony. I brought them here with the money from selling this house." A murmur rolled across the garden like a small wave smacking polished shoes. Marco offered his hand. "Cugino," he said. Tony stared at it as if it were a mirror he didn't ask for. "What is this?" he whispered. "Legacy," I said. "The one you tried to rebrand." Sophia stepped forward. "Mr. Tony, your mother is a saint," she said in careful English. "She sponsor all of us. She give us future." Margaret's lips pressed thin. William's gaze flicked to the guests, to the tent, to the truck, counting reputations like receipts. I faced the crowd. "Some of you ate in my restaurant years ago," I said. "You called me Aunt Gio and asked for extra sauce. For 45 years I fed this city, and with those earnings I bought this house in 1985 for $89,000. Every mortgage payment, every renovation, every fork, my money. When Tony and Bethany told their friends I don't help, I decided to demonstrate the help I can give." Pepe lifted his phone to show photos. Me in a white apron with shoulders squared, a wall of regulars raising glasses, a James Beard nomination clipping from 2003. "Work," he said simply. "Family," Lucia added, opening her portfolio to a charcoal of our trattoria, steam rising like prayers. I turned to my son. "I sold for $2,850,000, I said. Every penny went to visas, flights, settlement funds, tuition, and a seed for a new Romanos that remembers how to be hungry and kind." Tony finally found air. "That was my—" He stopped on the word inheritance like it burned his teeth. "It was the family home," he tried. "You had expectations," I said softly. "I had deeds." Bethany pulled off her ring and set it on the table, quietly, almost respectfully. "I can't marry a man who speaks about his mother like a burden," she said, voice tiny and true. Somewhere inside me, an old hurt unclenched. People began to leak from the garden, Tony's managing partner with a taut nod, 2 judges who suddenly remembered early mornings, the Crawfords in a whispering gust. The moving crew worked with gentle efficiency, wrapping a life in padded blankets. Tony stood in the emptied living room at 11:30 p.m., staring at nail shadows where our family once hung. "Where am I supposed to go?" he asked, voice as thin as stretched dough. "That's no longer my problem," I said, not cruelly, just truthfully. "I have given you shelter for years, and you used it as a mirror to admire yourself." Rodriguez handed me the final inventory. "We'll deliver to the Richmond tomorrow, Mrs. Romano." I pressed an envelope into his palm. "For your trouble, and for handling our things like they remember." Tony's phone began to rattle across the bare floor. Texts, missed calls, notifications flaring like startled birds. "Someone filmed it," he muttered. "Beth's friends posted," he scrolled. Hashtag engagement party meltdown. Hashtag Italian justice. His laugh was a dry cough. "How many?" "Enough," I said. By morning, the Chronicle ran a small feature online about an immigrant matriarch who sold a house to reunite a family. Food and Wine reached out asking if Romano's was returning to North Beach. A reporter wanted to interview me about second acts. I brewed coffee and cracked 2 eggs into a pan, feeling the quiet click of my spine, like something that had been out of place had found home. At 2 p.m., Harold Morrison, Tony's senior partner, called. Tony's face drained as he listened. "Monday, 8 a.m., he repeated. "Yes, sir." He sat, the phone heavy in his hand. "I think I'm about to lose my job," he said. "Reputation is currency," I replied. "You have been overspending." That night, the Richmond kitchen smelled like tomatoes and basil. Marco drafted menus on a yellow legal pad. Sophia spread nursing program brochures across the table, like a gambler laying out a sure hand. Pepe wrote a consulting pitch for Italian businesses entering American markets. Lucia sketched, graphite moving like a fast prayer. They thanked me for forks and napkins and space and time. They asked about my knees, my sleep, my childhood. They called me Zia and meant it. I slept for 6 hours without waking, something I hadn't done in years. 3 days later, Tony was out of Morrison, Whitfield and Associates. The email said, "Conduct unbecoming to the firm's values," which is partner language for we can't sell discretion when your family is trending on TikTok. He found work at a smaller practice. Personal injury, lower salary, fewer luncheons. Bethany, meanwhile, returned her ring for credit and announced a new relationship with a man whose last name sounds like a venture fund. Her caption read, "Found someone who shares my values." I wished her well in the privacy of my kitchen, which is where I do my best for giving. Tony showed up at Romano's, Marco's Romano's, one Thursday in November during a pasta class. The dining room was warm with people shaping dough and laughter. He waited by the door, an orphan, in an expensive suit. "Mama," he said, "may we talk?" I studied him the way you study bread to know if it needs more time. His shoulders had dropped. The glassiness was gone from his eyes. He looked human. "I understand," he began, "what you were trying to teach me." I threw away the parts of me that mattered because I wanted rooms that applauded when I entered. Those rooms emptied fast. I nodded once. "Understanding is not the end of a lesson," I said. "It is the beginning of repair." He swallowed. "Is there a way back?" I looked around. Marco was showing a teenager how to feel when dough is ready. Sophia was tying an apron around an older man with shaky hands. Pepe was explaining permits to a baker from Oakland. Lucia had hung a charcoal of my mother over the bar, the crucifix gleaming above it. The restaurant thrummed with a kind of music that never once played at Tony's parties. Tony's phone began to rattle across the bare floor, texts, missed calls, notifications flaring like startled birds. "Someone filmed it," he muttered. Beth's friends posted. He scrolled. Hashtag engagement party meltdown. Hashtag Italian justice. His laugh was a dry cough. "How many?" "Enough," I said. By morning, the Chronicle ran a small feature online about an immigrant matriarch who sold a house to reunite a family. Food and Wine reached out asking if Romano's was returning to North Beach. A reporter wanted to interview me about second acts. I brewed coffee and cracked 2 eggs into a pan, feeling the quiet click of my spine, like something that had been out of place had found home. At 2 p.m., Harold Morrison, Tony's senior partner, called. Tony's face drained as he listened. "Monday, 8 a.m., he repeated. "Yes, sir." He sat, the phone heavy in his hand. "I think I'm about to lose my job," he said. "Reputation is currency," I replied. "You have been overspending." That night, the Richmond kitchen smelled like tomatoes and basil. Marco drafted menus on a yellow legal pad. Sophia spread nursing program brochures across the table, like a gambler laying out a sure hand. Pepe wrote a consulting pitch for Italian businesses entering American markets. Lucia sketched, graphite moving like a fast prayer. They thanked me for forks and napkins and space and time. They asked about my knees, my sleep, my childhood. They called me Zia and meant it. I slept for 6 hours without waking, something I hadn't done in years. 3 days later, Tony was out of Morrison, Whitfield and Associates. The email said, "Conduct unbecoming to the firm's values," which is partner language for, "We can't sell discretion when your family is trending on TikTok." He found work at a smaller practice. Personal injury, lower salary, fewer luncheons. Bethany, meanwhile, returned her ring for credit and announced a new relationship with a man whose last name sounds like a venture fund. Her caption read, "Found someone who shares my values." I wished her well in the privacy of my kitchen, which is where I do my best forgiving. Tony showed up at Romano's, Marco's Romano's, one Thursday in November during a pasta class. The dining room was warm with people shaping dough and laughter. He waited by the door, an orphan in an expensive suit. "Mama," he said, "may we talk?" I studied him the way you study bread to know if it needs more time. His shoulders had dropped. The glassiness was gone from his eyes. He looked human. "I understand," he began, "what you were trying to teach me." I threw away the parts of me that mattered because I wanted rooms that applauded when I entered. Those rooms emptied fast. I nodded once. "Understanding is not the end of a lesson," I said. "It is the beginning of repair." He swallowed. "Is there a way back?" I looked around. Marco was showing a teenager how to feel when dough is ready. Sophia was tying an apron around an older man with shaky hands. Pepe was explaining permits to a baker from Oakland. Lucia had hung a charcoal of my mother over the bar, the crucifix gleaming above it. The restaurant thrummed with a kind of music that never once played at Tony's parties. "You are welcome at Sunday dinner," I said, "if you come as Antonio Romano, not Tony Roman. You will kiss your aunt's cheek. You will hang the family photos you took down, and you will eat whatever is on the table with gratitude. If you cannot do that, then please stay lost until you're found." He nodded. "I'll try," he said. "Not try," I corrected softly. "Do." He left without asking for a reservation. Marco set an extra place anyway. December let down a soft fog, and the restaurant filled like a church on Christmas Eve. We called it Romano's Kitchen and Story because every plate carried a paragraph from home. Marco's ragu made strangers confess childhoods they'd forgotten. Sophia graduated her program with honors and took a position at UCSF, where she wrapped the elderly in dignity and warm blankets. Pepe closed his third contract helping a family bakery export panettone without losing its soul to preservatives. Lucia's first show opened in a mission gallery, charcoal streets that looked like they remembered footsteps. People came for pasta and stayed for the long table where we sat after closing, plates pushed away, hands wrapping around small cups of espresso like votive lights. We passed the copper pasta machine down the table like a crown and laughed at stories that were never funny until you survived them. I kept the studio in the sunset as my quiet place. On mornings when my knees felt like old doors, I brewed mocha and watched fog erase and redraw the city. One Sunday, Tony arrived early, hair damp, suit abandoned for a sweater. He carried a cardboard box. Inside were the framed photographs he'd removed. My parents smiling on their wedding day in Naples, baby Antonio in lace at Saints Peter and Paul, a birthday table crowded with cousins whose names don't fit in country clubs. "I had them repaired," he said, voice careful. The glass was cracked. He hung them himself, hammer tentative at first. Then sure. He stepped back, breath held, and something inside his face loosened. "I remember," he said to the room, to the wall, to himself. He kissed my cheek. It was the first time in years that the gesture felt like a sentence that ends in a period instead of a question mark. That night, he stayed to help mop. He wrapped the cord around the machine the way I taught him, the right way, the tidy way. And he listened to Marco argue with a supplier about tomato ripeness, like it was trial strategy. When he left, he kissed the crucifix with 2 fingers, the way my mother used to, a habit he swore he never learned. Habits know otherwise. I do not regret selling the house. Homes are not walls. They are witnesses. That house watched me knead grief into bread and turn small bills into a mortgage. It also watched my son and his wife erase our name and replace it with soft art and softer lies. Some witnesses deserve to be dismissed. The Hendersons send me photos sometimes, 3 children sprawled on the living room floor doing homework, 2 shaggy dogs misbehaving on the stair. "We love it here," the mother writes. "It feels like a place that was loved before us." I tell her that's exactly right. Love leaves a seasoning you cannot scrub away. As for Tony, I measure progress the same way I test dough, with my hands. He shows up mostly on time. He eats what is served. He asks, "How are your knees?" and waits for the answer. He no longer introduces me as help. He has stopped saying "our" when he speaks of my kitchen. Bethany married a man who photographs yachts. I wish her good wind. I wish my son a good appetite. Sometimes before we open, I stand alone in the dining room with the copper machine, the crucifix, the Chronicle review, and the photograph of my father, young and impossible. I think about the night my son and his wife said, "I eat but don't help," how the words stung, how my quiet moved heavier than any shouted curse. I think about the 3 phone calls I made with clean hands and a steady voice. I think about airports and arrivals and a backyard full of people learning that legacy is a verb. If you're waiting for vengeance, forgive me. I chose restoration. I did not ruin my son. I rebuilt my family. I did not throw him out. I opened a door and told him the address. If he knocks as Antonio, I will answer. If he comes as Tony Roman, the door will be locked. And if anyone asks what I contribute, I show them a full dining room, a wall of faces that refuse to be erased, and 4 young people alive with work. I lift my hands, the same hands that rolled 1,000 Sundays, and I say, this, all of this,